I hope everybody is doing well. This is Milton Alimadi. I wanted to say a few words today about Africa's problems, the African so-called condition. So, most African countries won independence in the 1960s. They got rid of the European colonial rulers whose countries were exploiting Africa's resources and Africa's people. At the Berlin Conference from November 1884 to February 1885, the European nations partitioned the African countries. They took over the land. They took over the mineral resources. They took control of Africans as laborers, cheap labor. So they exploited their labor, paid them very low wages, and you could not avoid not being exploited because they imposed taxes. And the only way you could earn currency to pay the taxes was to work for the Europeans who had taken over control of the land. And if you didn't pay the taxes, they would throw you in prison. So that is how they took control of resources, land, and labor. So they exported the surplus or the profits of the resources to Europe. They produced manufacturers, and then they forced Africans to buy these manufactured products. That was the Berlin arrangement, and that is what still prevails up today in 2025. The African leaders, the achievement of independence, formal or independence, should not be underrated. It was historic in that it drove the European physically as the rulers out of Africa. But what the new leaders were not able to accomplish was to transform Africa's economic relationship with these former European powers and the new powers who came upon the scene, which is the United States and, of course, today China as well. It is not for a lack of trying. Some leaders who tried their best. Kwame Nkrumah tried to industrialize Ghana. He was the biggest advocate of a United States of Africa, which of course is the only solution. Because if we had a United States of Africa with an Africa-wide armed force under one command, there's no way any country today could exploit Africa's resources and Africa's labor and force us to buy their manufactured products, because we would also be producing manufactured products, you see? So leaders like Nkrumah, of course, overthrown in 1965 in a CIA-backed coup d'etat. Patrice Lumumba, of course, was murdered in 1961, a CIA and Belgian operation. Those who came much later and tried to transform the African relationship with the West, like Thomas Sankara, was also brutally killed in 1987. And that explains why Africa is in the condition it is today. It continues to be exploited. Now we are seeing some movement in the alliance of Sahel states countries. They want to change that neocolonial relationship with France in Mali, in Niger, and Burkina Faso. That is why they kicked the French armed forces out of their countries. They're trying to take control of their production, of their resources, so that they process it domestically within their countries and start some manufacturing. Ultimately, the solution is still a United States of Africa. The best manifestation of Africa's failure to transform its economies is when we see young people drowning in the Mediterranean, trying to escape to Europe so they can go there and work in toilets, work in kitchens, sweeping the streets, or working in those farms being exploited in southern Italy. They're desperate. It's not that they're going to be loitering in Europe. They want some income so they can send it back to help their families back in Africa. We don't have to be doing that because the resources that allow the European countries and the United States and China to become wealthy come from Africa. So what do we need to do? We need to remove the obstacles that prevent Africa from eventually uniting and forming a United States of Africa. We cannot allow any single person to be in power for 40 years. What kind of nonsense is that? So you can't be complaining, Europe did this, the United States is doing this, China is doing that. Why should they change that relationship if it benefits them? So it's up on us. The ball is in our court at the end of the day. You can complain until kingdom come, but the change has to be initiated by we in Africa, we the Africans. So let's start with a number of things. Alassane Ouattara, 82 years old, is trying to manufacture another election victory in Ivory Coast. Just imagine that. A guy in his 80s wants to continue ruling when we have young, capable leaders in their 30s and 40s. That should not be allowed to happen under any circumstances. Paul Biya, 94 years old. Cameroon is burning. He still wants to manufacture another election rigging and so-called victory so he can continue exploiting the country on behalf of his family and on behalf of French interests. In Uganda, we have an 80-year-old general, Yoweri Museveni, in power for 40 years, wants to steal another election in January. Under no circumstance should that be allowed. I don't know about the other constitutions, but Uganda's constitution allows for a dictator, somebody who has usurped power, to be removed. It's in the constitution. Sisters and brothers, the only way we can stop the suffering of the African collective family is by forming a United States of Africa, so that we have the armed forces to protect the citizens, to protect the land, to protect the resources. We have a huge market to sustain manufacturing production and intra-African trade. Right now, yes, the Continental Free Trade Agreement has already been signed by most African countries, but even if that takes hold, what are we trading in? We would still be trading in so-called primary commodities. We need to escalate to manufacture, because manufacture produces skilled workers, and obviously the revenue from manufactured products is much higher. So number one, let's remove these leaders who are obstacles to Africa fulfilling its dream. And then number two, form a United States of Africa so we can move into manufacturing production and be able to protect our citizens and our resources. Thank you, sisters and brothers.